Hey fellow watchers of the multiverse, welcome to another exciting episode of If I Had Written. This series dives into cancelled projects, pre-writes, rewrites, and custom projects, giving you a glimpse of what might be, or what could have been. Today we conclude our journey with the Amazing Spider-Man Maximum Carnage finale. If you haven't watched the previous 3 parts yet, make sure to check them out first in the playlist to get the full story. We're rolling out tons of new fan fictions and original content, and there's so much more to come. By supporting us on Patreon and Substack, you'll get exclusive perks and behind the scenes content, which could be stories, fan fictions, all things in between. Plus, you're helping us fund the production of Season 2 of our What If motion comic animations. Your support is crucial for us to continue creating high quality content and bringing your favorite characters to life in new and exciting ways. Becoming a member means you'll get early access to videos, special updates, and the chance to support more amazing projects. Thank you so much for joining us on this epic journey through the multiverse. Stay tuned for even more incredible adventures. Location: Oscorp Industries. Peter watched from the viewing window as Venom was strapped to the table. This was going to be the day the symbiote would be removed from Eddie Brock. Venom had been trying to assert dominance by resisting all efforts to remove it. It was only Peter's threat of using his explosive webs that made Venom stop resisting. Standing outside with Peter was Dr. Kurt Connors. He was the one who made all this happen. He was the one that figured out that a sonic attack would safely remove the symbiote from Eddie Brock. Peter thought about the events that led up to that moment. The mad scientist, Dr. Otto Octavius, had been defeated. Symbiotes were no longer a part of the human population. The mind control devices had been retrieved by Oscorp Industries and were never going to be used ever again. At the request of Peter Parker, the government had granted Eddie Brock immunity from the prosecution of all his crimes committed at Times Square. However, the deal was only valid if he allowed for the removal of the Venom symbiote. Peter asked Dr. Connors if the process will hurt Eddie. Dr. Connors signed and said it probably might, but it will hurt the symbiote more. Then someone else joined them. It was the deputy director of the FBI. Peter asked him what he was going to do at Oscorp, and the man replied that it was pretty obvious. He was making sure that Eddie Brock fulfilled the terms in his immunity deal. He wanted to see through before he was going back on a plane to Washington. The scientists in the room indicated that it was time to start the sonic attack, so the 3 men outside picked up their earplugs and wore them. The scientists inside turned on the speaker, and Venom came undone. It shrieked and peeled off of Eddie. Peter was amazed at the futility of the organism. Then one of the scientists placed a really large beaker over it, and Venom slinked into it. They then stopped the sonic attack. Eddie Brock was now free. Meanwhile, across town, Peter Parker's worst nightmare was back. Location: downtown New York. Octavius was a defeated man. His plans had failed, and now he was left with nothing. However, he had been given a second chance at redemption. The Carnage symbiote, or at least what was left of it, had chosen him. It bonded with him and healed him. Now he was a new man. Now he was a man on a mission. He wore a large trench coat with a hat and dark glasses. The outfit distinguished him as a regular person. It properly hid his Akinator arms, which were now stronger and sharper because of Carnage. To the rest of the world, he was a dead man, but that was about to change. He needed to finish what he started, but his assets were gone and he needed them. To get them, he needed funding that he did not have. So he was going to get some. He walked into the bank and headed right to the large steel vault. A security guard tried to stop him, but Octavius wasn't listening. When he got to the vault, he allowed his arms to burst out of his coat. Several people around shrieked and screamed. The security guards pulled out his gun and asked Octavius to step away from the vault. Octavius simply used one of his arms to grab the gun from the guard, and another arm slapped the man away. He then went on to use his arms to rip off the gargantuan door of the vault. He smiled at the large bundles of dollars. He found a large sack in the vault and began filling it with the cash bundles. When he was done filling the sack, he lifted it up and turned to leave, but there was an obstacle. Or rather, several of them. Standing in his way were several terrified police officers. Their guns were locked and loaded and also aimed at him. They asked him to put down the sack and surrender. Octavius smiled. He didn't put down the sack. Instead, he let the Carnage symbiote out. It formed red pointy spikes that shot out of his body. The spikes stabbed all of the cops, picked them up from the floor into the air and dropped them on the ground. The red Carnage symbiote then receded from the cops and entered back into the body of Dr. Octavius. With the symbiote back into his body, Octavius then began making his way out of the building, walking on all four Akinator arms. Location: Oscorp Industries building. Dr. Curtis Connors was saying goodbye to Eddie Brock, Peter Parker, and the FBI Deputy Director. All the men were happy until the Deputy Director's phone rang. He stepped away to answer while the others studied him. His smile changed from surprise to shock. The others were wondering what was going on. Then someone in a large foyer let out a loud gasp. The men turned to find out who that was, and they saw people staring at the television on the wall. It was showing images of carnage at one of the city's banks. A picture of Dr. Otto Octavius was on one side of the screen. Peter looked closely at it. The man was indeed back. The news was reporting that he had hit a bank and taken millions of dollars. Then the FBI Deputy Director came over and said that Ock was back. Eddie asked him how that was possible. The man was supposed to be dead beneath a pike, smoldering rubble. The Deputy Director said that he didn't know. The fact that Ock was back and he was robbing banks, it just didn't make sense. He said that Octavius had killed several cops and eyewitnesses reported that he did so with a red symbiote that came out of his body. "Oh no," Peter said. The others asked him what's wrong. He replied that the red symbiote was Carnage, and Carnage was furious. "It appears that the mad scientist let the symbiote infect him," said Peter. The FBI Deputy Director said that they better go there now and see things for themselves. They could track down Octavius from there. Peter asked Eddie Brock if he'd like to tag along. Eddie replied that he didn't need to ask twice. Dr. Connors asked Peter if he was wearing a suit in case Octavius decided to show up. Peter unbuttoned his shirt to reveal his Spider-Man suit, which he wore underneath. Dr. Connors was impressed. He simply said, "Good." It had been several minutes since Eddie Brock, Peter Parker, and the FBI Director left to the crime scene at the bank. Dr. Connors was back in his office catching up on some paperwork that needed to be attended to. Then he heard a thud rock the building. At first, he thought an earthquake was happening, but this was no earth tremor. Another thud rocked the building, and this time, he narrowed it down to his side of the building. The thuds continued, and quickly, and they ever came closer from the shrieks and screams of the staff members. He made an educated guess at what was coming. He was right. The window to his corner office has blown in, and Dr. Connors knew who it was. Octavius emerged, and he had been climbing the building with the help of his arms. As he got into the office, Connors stood up and asked him what he wanted. Dr. Octavius used an Akinator arm to grab Connors by his neck. He then lifted him up into the air and spoke to him. He said that Dr. Connors couldn't possibly give him what he wanted. However, How could he help him get closer to what he wanted? He asked Dr. Connors for the location of the symbiotes and the mind control devices. Connors replied that they didn't exist anymore, that they had all been destroyed. Octavius tightened the grip around his face. He said that he knew Oscorp didn't destroy any past projects or specimen. He said that he knew that because he once worked there and helped formulate that particular company policy. He asked one more time where the devices and the symbiotes were. Connors replied that it was in the vaults in the basement. Doc Ock smiled and said that Connors will take him to it. They got to the basement and Dr. Connors placed his palm on the electrical panel. The door hissed open. Dr. Connors then asked Octavius why he wanted the symbiotes and mind control devices. Dr. Octavius replied that he needed to finish his work. The symbiotes were the key to modifying humans. Connors said that symbiotes don't modify humans. Octavius disagreed, saying that the Carnage symbiote practically brought him back from the dead. Symbiotes were capable of so much. He was going to help them achieve that. Octavius packed the devices into a large case. He also carried the symbiotes. His large symbiotes had been reduced to little organisms, living inside beakers. He picked them up and put them into the case. He picked up the cases with his arms, and just then Oscorp security guards showed up and opened fire on Doc Ock. The symbiote shielded him and absorbed all of the bullets. When the guards stopped to reload, Doc Ock then killed them in the same manner that he killed the cops at the bank. He stabbed them with the large, sharp symbiotic spikes. Dr. Connors was horrified as Octavius executed the guards. He then said that Octavius won't succeed with his plans. Dr. Octavius smugly asked, "And who will stop me?" It was dark by the time Eddie Brock and Peter Parker returned to Oscorp Industries. They had heard the bad news. Doc Ock had visited Oscorp Industries and catered away important equipment, as well as the symbiotes. What was most annoying was the fact that they were supposed to be destroyed. Oscorp wasn't supposed to have kept those symbiotes alive. They were met in the lobby by Dr. Connors, who looked distraught. He apologized to Peter, saying that it wasn't his intentions to let the symbiotes fall into the wrong hands. Peter asked if there was any way to track the mind control devices the same way they did before. Dr. Connors said that it could not be done. The only way to track it was to acquire a mind control device that was on the network, unless the authorities found out whatever place he was working out of. It was pointless. Now they had to wait until Doc Ock made his move. Eddie then asked if Doc Ock had taken the Venom symbiote as well. Dr. Connors replied that he hadn't. The Venom symbiote hadn't even been moved to the basement. Eddie said that he should take back the symbiote. Peter said that he can't do that. Eddie argued that Doc Ock was back, and there was no way Peter could take him all on his own. After all, when it was all over, he could simply turn the volume on the symbiote and it would be gone again. Peter said that he made it sound so easy. Dr. Connors said that Eddie was right though. Doc Ock was more powerful than ever. He now had the Carnage symbiote in him. He won't be an easy villain to take down. Peter would need all the help he could get. Peter thought about it for a moment and said that immediately they defeat Doc Ock, the volume would be turned up. Eddie agreed. It had been more than 48 hours since Doc Ock had been seen. Law enforcement weren't able to track him down. Peter and Venom were swinging around the city trying to find possible secluded areas that could support Doc Ock's science projects. So far, they had no luck. It was now dark, and they stopped on the Empire State Building. They were talking when Venom drew Peter's attention to something going in on the street. Peter looked and saw a huge symbiote walking down the street. Even surprising was that no one else was panicking or running away at the sight of the symbiote. The device on its back answered the question of why no one was running. It didn't look like the original Oscorp Industries mind control device. but Peter guessed what its purpose was. Then something remarkable and shocking happened. It held a woman in the street and kissed her. While the kiss was happening, it actually engulfed her and became her. The horror of what happened shocked Peter. The symbiote had bonded with a human being. Venom snapped Peter out of his horror and asked him if he'll take down the symbiote. Peter, who was still fascinated by what he saw, didn't say anything. Venom left him and left down the building, heading right towards the symbiote. Peter saw Venom going to the symbiote that seemed to do the trick. He leaped down after Venom just before he hit the ground. They shot their webs and swung together directly at the symbiote. They were perfectly in sync. They kicked the symbiote's head in and staggered, and it hit a streetlight pole. Everyone around gasped, and Peter promptly removed the device from the symbiote's back, and the symbiote simply dropped to the floor and died. Everyone looked at Spider-Man and Venom. Someone yelled, "Murderers!" Peter suggested that he and Venom get out of there now. Venom said that he won't leave without the dead symbiote. He said that the geeks at Oscorp Industries would be able to figure out how they managed to kill it, and the innocent woman. As Venom lifted the woman up, the black glint of the symbiote in it, he knew for certain that the woman had been infected. He just didn't know how she was dead. After a few hours of examining the new mind-controlled device, the dead woman and the symbiote inside her, Dr. Connors had a few theories to explain what happened. He explained to Peter and Eddie that the symbiotes normally have the same mind and personality as their hosts. Venom and Eddie have the same personality. If Venom infected another person that didn't have the same personality as it did, it would leave that person killing him or her in the process. The mind control device was simply the work of a genius. Otto simply made a new one, but this one was better suited for its purposes. He said the mind control device used the genome of the symbiote. His theory was that it made the host have the same personality as the symbiote. When Peter pulled out the device, the symbiote didn't have the time to leave, so it simply killed the host in itself. Peter then asked how else he was supposed to get the symbiote out, unsuspecting people. Dr. Connors replied that a sonic attack would do the trick. It had been tested and trusted. He winked at Eddie as he did that. Venom then spoke out of Eddie, saying, "I don't like you." Peter turned to Eddie and asked what was going on. Eddie replied that Venom didn't like Dr. Connors. Dr. Connors smiled and said that Venom had better get used to him. Venom replied, "Never." Just then, Peter's mobile phone rang and he answered it. The news he heard was heartbreaking. It was a New York police officer informing him that his girlfriend, Mary Jane, had been kidnapped yet again. This time, Doc Ock was responsible. Location: Doc Ock's secret laboratory. Ock had Mary Jane strapped onto something. He had a few symbiotes as his assistants. It really was remarkable what he had been able to do, and with the creatures in such a short period. His plan for mankind was working out perfectly. Now he had divided to the end of the threat of Spider-Man. As long as Spider-Man kicked and breathed, he'd always seek to destroy his plans and him. After all, he had almost succeeded in doing just that. Mary Jane screamed and tugged at the straps. Ock walked up to her and said that she had quite the healthy set of lungs. Her high screams were a telltale sign. He then went on to tell her why he kidnapped her and what she could do for him. He said that he desperately wanted Spider-Man dead, but he was too busy to do the deed on his own. That was why he recruited Mary Jane. She replied that she would never kill Peter. Doc Ock laughed and said he knew she would never kill her boyfriend. And that was why he added the incentive. He opened a cryo container to reveal a large red symbiote. The symbiote then walked out of the cryo container and went all over to Mary Jane. There was a mind control device on its back. She screamed and struggled, but the symbiote kissed her and bonded with her. When it was done, Doc Ock removed the straps and set her free. Location: Oscorp Industries. An hour later, Mary Jane arrived at the lobby of Oscorp Industries building. She asked to meet Peter Parker. She had previously gone to the house to find Peter, but he wasn't there. A few minutes later, Peter stepped out of the elevator along with Eddie Brock. He had been told that Mary Jane had been found, and she wanted to speak with him. He saw her standing in the middle of the lobby. He became so excited and began to run to meet her. He didn't notice the mind control device was strapped to her back. But Eddie did. Eddie also saw that MJ wasn't actually Mary Jane. He called out to Peter to stop, but Peter was too close. He then ran after Peter, transforming into Venom while at it. Just as Peter reached MJ, she extended her hand, which was now a red spike shaft. Then Venom pushed Peter away and got stabbed by the entire spike. After getting stabbed, Venom fell to the floor and began to recover. Then MJ fully transformed into a large red monster. Everyone around screamed and fled. Peter then jumped on her and tried to talk her down. Instead, he got punched and thrown to the wall. Venom got up and made to remove the mind control device, but Peter stopped him, saying that it would kill MJ. He instead asked that they try to capture her. Venom then began attacking the MJ symbiote. He jumped on her and pulled her down while Peter spun electrical webs around her. The webs tied her up and also electrocuted her enough for Oscorp scientists to administer her rather heavy sedatives. Mary Jane was strapped. She was back to her normal self as the symbiote had receded. Removing the mind control device was a non-starter. Peter asked that they use a sonic attack to remove the symbiote instead. And that was what Dr. Connors was about to do. He put on his earplugs and everyone else did the same. Then he turned the volume up. As he did so, MJ jerked and began seizing. Then her heart rate dropped so fast, and a few seconds later, the heart monitor began flatlining. She was dead. Dr. Connors then turned the volume down. to use a defibrillator to jumpstart MJ's heart. It worked. Her heart rate was going up and she was fine. Dr. Connors then asked everyone else to follow him out of the room. Outside, a distraught Peter asked what had just happened. Connors replied that the sonic attack actually killed Mary Jane. Peter asked how that was possible. It had worked with Eddie. Connors replied that they were seeing a new strain of symbiotes, and it wasn't far-fetched that Doc Ock had configured them to be immune to the sonic attack. Parker asked what could be done. Connors said that they needed to make the device stop working. When it did, they would be able to use sound to take the symbiote out. Dr. Connors said that the mind control worked, just like the previous one did. A central server would connect it all. Peter asked how they could find the location of the central server. Dr. Connors replied that they had been able to track it through cell towers, but the exact location wasn't precise. He said that Peter and Venom would have to search out the particular grid for themselves. Peter agreed to do that. Peter and Venom were at the grid. They were doing this without the help of law enforcement. Everyone agreed the cops could scare Doc Ock into hiding. They were looking for a non-scripted building. They didn't find one. Peter was already getting frustrated when Venom asked him if he noticed something. Peter said that he didn't notice anything. Venom replied that this was the same area where he had taken Mary Jane at the time he had kidnapped her. He said maybe what they were looking for wasn't above ground, it was below. Peter agreed. The underground sewage treatment plant wasn't used, and it was the perfect place to conduct secret experiments. They got into the storm drain and began making their way to the sewage treatment plant. They were there in no time, and they got there and found more than a dozen symbiotes guarding the entrance. They heard the voice of Doc Ock inside of the plant. He said that he had been expecting them. However, to get him, they would have to go through the symbiotes. Peter was in no mood for games. He told Venom to hold on while he handled it. Peter then used his laser webs. He had never used them before until now. They proved to be effective. He sliced his way through the symbiotes, killing them easily. When he got into the treatment plant, nothing prepared him for the sight that he saw. What he saw wasn't Doc Ock. It was Monster Ock. He was a large, red monster with 4 arms behind him. He charged at Peter with fury. Parker extended his hand to shoot his laser webs, but it never made it. Monster Ock used his Akinator arms and stabbed at the web shooter, damaging it. Peter's wrist would have been stabbed too, but Venom stepped in to distract Monster Ock. Venom received a barrage of blows from Monster Ock. Soon after, Venom went down. Peter then took up the fight, tried using his explosive and electrical webs. Monster Ock saw it coming, and he summarily destroyed those web shooters. Peter was now left with his original web shooters. He tried jumping at Monster Ock to start punching him, but the Akinator arms just swatted him away. He was now on the floor, and he crawled over to where Venom was. He told Venom that they needed a plan of action. He would take a blow while Venom delivers a serious blow to Monster Ock, and when he recovers, Peter would deal another blow, while Venom takes the heat. Venom agreed, and it was on. Peter jumped at Monster Ock, and he was pelted with several blows. That left Monster Ock's flank open, and he got attacked by Venom, who didn't hold back. Then Monster Ock recovered and began attacking Venom. Peter then got up and began punching Monster Ock, using his webs to tie Monster Ock's arms. This turn-by-turn attack on Monster Ock continued, and the monster was almost defeated. Then he used his arms to swipe Peter away. Peter landed on the ground panel, and it shattered. Its containments fell to the ground. Among was a gun similar to the one Venom had used to kill Carnage. Peter picked it up, and he was surprised that Doc Ock had decided to make it again. He saw oxygen canisters lined up against the far wall. He knew what would happen if he blew up the oxygen canisters. The entire complex would explode, killing Doc Ock. He would survive if only he and Venom reached the exit in time. Doc Ock would die, and his experiments would die with him. Or he could just shoot Doc Ock directly and go shut off the central server. What choice would he make? Choice A. Peter kills Doc Ock. Peter became overcome by anger. He yelled at Monster Ock, and then the monster faced him. The Carnage symbiote receded into his body, and the true face of Dr. Octavius was shown. He knew what that gun could do. He had only made it in the event that the symbiotes became hard to control. Now it was being aimed at him. He began to cry and begging Peter to show mercy. He said that he was sorry for killing Peter's parents and infecting Mary Jane. Venom called out to Peter, telling him not to listen. Peter listened and pulled the trigger. The gun went off with a loud bang, and Ock was blown to smithereens. The gun fell out of Peter's hands, and he sat on the floor. Eddie Brock sat on the floor with him. Then his phone rang. It was Dr. Connors telling him to shut off the central server. Peter went to the computer and shut off the central server. Back at Oscorp Industries, Dr. Connors turned the volume up, and the symbiote unlatched itself from Mary Jane. She was fine and alive. Dr. Connors told Peter the good news over the phone. Choice B. Peter destroys the central server. Peter pointed the gun at Monster Ock. The symbiote receded, and it became Dr. Octavius again. Ock asked Peter to put down the gun, but Peter was angry. He thought about how Dr. Octavius had killed his parents, and now he had infected Mary Jane. So he asked Venom to head for the exit. When Venom had gone to a safe distance, Peter turned the gun away from Ock, aimed it at the oxygen canisters, and pulled the trigger. Then his spider sense took over. He used his super speed and ran towards the exit. He held Venom, and they ran away out of the storm drains, just as the sewage treatment plant exploded behind under them. When they got above ground, the ground crumbled beneath them and they swung to a safe distance. Then Peter's phone rang. It was Dr. Connors. He asked how it went. Peter replied that Doc Ock was dead. Dr. Connors asked if he was able to shut off the central server. Peter replied that he destroyed it. Dr. Connors was silent. Peter then asked what the problem was. Dr. Connors signed. Then he said that Mary Jane had died the moment the device was shut off. And so, that is going to be it, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, for part 4. I don't think anybody was expecting an interactive ending where they got to choose what would happen. Now, I will confirm that choice A was the main choice that now leads to the Amazing Spider-Man 5. But choice B would be a darker ending where Mary Jane ended up dying from the central server. So I know that was a crazy ending. That's where things end. That's where things end. So I do want to say thank you so much for tuning in for all 4 parts. Now, the Amazing Spider-Man 5 is going to be coming out very soon, so I do want to say that this was just a crazy story, a crazy ending, and I'm super happy to finally have all 4 parts out. How do you guys like the new MissedThePart schedule? And again, if you guys are new to the channel, do make sure to support us because we can make so much more together. Make sure to check out the Substack. We got a Patreon, the YouTube community. Make sure to join us. Click that join button. It's gonna be crazy.